I was 11 when someone in my own family abused me in an old chicken coop behind my grandmother's house. I didn't scream. I didn't even know I should. My name is June Elliott. I'm 75 years old, and I stayed silent for more than 6 decades. But everything changed the day my granddaughter asked me, "Grandma, has anyone ever touched you in a way that felt wrong?" That question pulled the truth out of hiding. If you've ever buried a painful memory to protect others, I understand. What helped you speak up, or what's still keeping you quiet? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there might need your courage right now. The cicadas always seem louder in July. Maybe it's just how still everything else is around here. I sat on the back porch, my knees wrapped in the old quilt I keep folded beside the wicker rocker. The sweet tea beside me had gone warm. The ice melted into little ghosts clinking at the bottom of the glass. I didn't mind. I wasn't drinking it anyway. I was watching her. Emily was twirling in the grass barefoot, her long brown hair trailing behind her like a ribbon. The way she moved, light-free, so certain that the world was good, I couldn't take my eyes off her. She reminded me of someone I once was. Or maybe of someone I once dreamed of being. "Bah," she called, spinning to face me. "If you had a superpower, what would it be?" I smiled softly. Probably time travel, so I could warn myself not to buy all those platform shoes in the 70s. She giggled, collapsing onto the lawn in that boneless way only children can. "That's not real time travel. That's fashion regret." I laughed more out of habit than humor. "Then what about you?" She sat up on her elbows, looking thoughtful. "I think I'd want to read people's feelings, not just their words." That made me pause. I watched her closely. "Why's that, sweetheart?" She shrugged. "Sometimes people say they're fine, but their eyes look like when the sun is behind the clouds, you know." Yes, I knew. I leaned back and let my eyes drift to the far end of the yard. The fence was still the same gray slats Paul and I had put up 30 years ago. Beyond it, the woods stirred in slow, breathless waves. And just beside the old oak tree, there was no swing. Not here. But in my mind, there it was. The swing from my childhood. Worn wood seat, a little cracked down the middle. Rusted chains that creaked when you leaned too far to one side. It used to hang behind Grandma Virginia's house in Girden, Arkansas, right where the crabgrass grew thickest and the honeysuckle wrapped around the clothesline pole. That swing should have been a place of laughter, of safety, of long summer afternoons spent chasing dragonflies and eating watermelon slices with juice running down my arms. But it wasn't. Not entirely. "Bah," Emily's voice pulled me back. "Did anything, I don't know, bad, ever happen to you when you were little?" I felt like the air changed around me. Not dramatically, just subtly, like a breeze that shifts direction without warning. I turned to her slowly. Her question wasn't accusatory, not even curious in the way kids often are. It was gentle, tender, as if she already knew the answer and only needed me to say it out loud. But how do you explain 60 years of silence? How do you unwrap a memory so tightly bound, it's practically fossilized inside you? I looked at her, really looked. 13. Bright, observant, sensitive. She reminded me even more of me now, and not just the happy parts. I opened my mouth, closed it. She waited. "I don't know how to answer you right now," I finally whispered, my throat suddenly dry. And that was the truth. Emily didn't press. She just nodded slowly and stood up, brushing grass off her shorts. "Okay," she said simply, and went inside. I sat for a long while after that. The sun dipped behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the yard. Crickets began to take over where the cicadas left off, and the porch light buzzed to life. Inside the house, I moved quietly. Old habits die hard. I opened the closet in the hallway and pulled down the wooden chest with the tarnished brass latch. The one I hadn't opened in at least a decade. Maybe more. I set it on the floor of my sewing room and sat cross-legged like a child staring at it for what felt like forever. My fingers trembled a little as I undid the latch. Inside, a mess of time waited for me: photographs faded to sepia, a pressed flower from someone's forgotten funeral, a church bulletin from 1979, a broken music box shaped like a bird, and beneath it all, a green velvet pouch. I opened it, my diary. Spiral bound, the cover fraying. The handwriting inside slanted and unsure like the girl who wrote it. A girl who used to ride a swing behind her grandmother's house. A girl who thought monsters only lived under beds, not in broad daylight, not in places called home. I closed my eyes, clutching the book to my chest. The swing was never just a swing. They sent me there every summer. It wasn't a question or a discussion. Just a fact that fell into place like the seasons. My parents both worked long shifts at the textile plant in Pine Bluff, and when June arrived, how fitting my name on the calendar, they packed my suitcase, kissed my forehead, and drove me down to Girden. Grandma Virginia's house sat at the end of a long dirt road that kicked up red dust behind our car like smoke. She lived in a white clapboard house with blue shutters that always needed painting, and a porch swing that creaked like it had a secret. The kind of house that smelled like flour and old hymn books. It was 1961, and I was 11 years old. That summer, the peach trees were heavy with fruit. The cicadas buzzed so loudly, they felt like part of the air, and the watermelon from the back porch tin tub tasted sweeter than any candy I'd ever known. Grandma always said the soil out there gave things more flavor. I didn't know about the soil, but it did give memories more weight. Raymond was already there when we pulled in. He was 19, Grandma's youngest son, my uncle, though that always sounded too formal for someone who still had acne and smelled vaguely of motor oil and Dr. Pepper. He was the kind of boy grown-ups called a handful and girls at church called funny and cute. He had that easy charm some boys wear like a jacket they never have to take off. He called me Junebug and messed up my hair and taught me to whistle between my fingers. "You've grown 2 inches since Easter," he said, picking me up like I weighed nothing. "At this rate, you'll be taller than me by Labor Day." I laughed. It felt easy back then. That first night, we ate fried catfish and hush puppies at the kitchen table while the fan spun above us like a lazy windmill. Grandma hummed hymns as she cleaned up, and Raymond told ghost stories on the porch steps, his flashlight under his chin, making shadows jump across the porch railings. "There's a lady who lives in the woods," he whispered, eyes wide. "She only comes out when she hears children laugh." I shrieked more from delight than fear, and he howled like a wolf. Grandma yelled from inside to cut out the nonsense, but I saw the smile tugging at her mouth when she thought we weren't looking. The days blurred in heat and dragonflies. I picked wildflowers, climbed trees, read Archie comics under the sycamore. And every afternoon, like clockwork, I rode the swing. It hung just behind the house, where the ground sloped down toward the edge of the trees. The seat was smooth and worn, the chain rusted in spots. It had been Raymond's once, then his older brother's, and now it was mine for the summer. Sometimes I pushed myself using my legs and the wind. But my favorite moments were when Raymond stood behind me pushing just hard enough to make my stomach flip. "Hold on tight, Junebug," he'd call. "Don't let go unless you want to fly clear to Hot Springs." The swing creaked and groaned, but it held. Just like everything else. One afternoon, when the air was thick and Grandma had gone to town for sugar and sewing thread, I was in the swing with my eyes closed, letting the breeze kiss my cheeks. I heard Raymond approach before I saw him, his steps on the dry grass, the sound of his Coke bottle clinking in his hand. "You want to see something?" he asked, his voice lighter than usual. I opened my eyes. "What is it?" "It's a secret," he said, leaning in close. "But only if you promise not to tell Grandma." I hesitated. Not because I was scared, he was my uncle after all. But there was something in the way he said it, something syrupy and slow that made my skin prickle. Still, I nodded. He led me across the yard, past the lilac bush, past the rusted wheelbarrow, and the empty doghouse that hadn't held a dog in years. We stopped in front of the old chicken coop. No chickens lived there anymore. Hadn't for years. Just an old wooden structure sagging a little with broken slats and a faint smell of dust and feathers. He pulled the door open. It groaned like it hadn't been moved in ages. "Go on in," he said, grinning. I stepped inside. It was dim, the light coming in through cracks in the walls. The air smelled of must and old straw. I looked around, expecting, I don't know, a hidden treasure, a frog in a jar, a carved name in the wall. But there was nothing, just the smell and the quiet. Then the door creaked again. It closed. Not slammed, just shut. I turned around, and everything changed. I didn't scream. I didn't know I should. People think fear is loud, that it shows up with broken glass and flailing arms, that it wails and pleads and makes a scene. But real fear, the kind that arrives unexpected, like a shadow across your plate, sinks in quiet. It teaches you silence before it ever teaches you to run. That's how I spent the rest of that summer. Quiet. I stopped swinging with Raymond. I still swung, yes, but alone. I'd wait until he wasn't watching from the porch, then climb onto the seat and let it sway gently beneath me. I kept my legs stiff, refusing to pump them. I didn't want to fly anymore. I wanted to disappear. The cicadas kept humming like nothing had changed. I used to think their song sounded like summer. Now it just sounded like someone shaking a tin full of pins beside my ear non-stop. It made me flinch. Grandma didn't notice much. She was always humming, always kneading dough, or washing linens, or talking on the phone with Aunt Louise about whose turn it was to host Thanksgiving. "You've gone thin, Junebug," she'd say now and then, scooping beans onto my plate. "Must be all that fresh air." I avoided her eyes just like I avoided his. Raymond, he didn't change. Or maybe that's what chilled me. He was still the same, laughing at jokes, throwing rocks at cans, asking if I wanted to help him paint the shed. As if nothing happened. As if I hadn't sat in the corner of the chicken coop holding my elbows to my sides so tightly I left bruises on myself. As if my silence had undone it all. One afternoon, it rained. One of those heavy Arkansas rainstorms that darken the sky midday and make the window panes chatter. I sat in the parlor, coloring a picture of a barnyard that now felt like anything but innocent. My red crayon broke in half. I didn't pick up the pieces. Later, I walked to Miss Loretta's house next door, an old widow who gave me lemon cookies and called me darlin', like I mattered. I stood on her porch, rain still dripping from my hair, and opened my mouth to speak. But I didn't know where to begin. I thought maybe I could say I don't feel right, or I think something's wrong, or maybe just, can I stay here tonight? But the words stayed lodged in my throat like marbles. Big, heavy, impossible. "Everything okay, Junie?" she asked, tilting her head. I nodded. "Did you get caught in the rain?" she asked, smiling. I nodded again. She gave me a cookie and a napkin and told me to go on home before Grandma worried. I walked back slowly, the cookie soggy by the time I got there. That night, I lay in the little bed in Grandma's guest room, the one with the pink quilt and the lace curtains. The fan spun circles in the ceiling. I tried to count them to fall asleep, but then I saw it. On my pillow sat a single green-striped candy, the kind I used to love, the kind Raymond always kept in his shirt pocket. Beneath it, a piece of notebook paper folded in half. I opened it with hands that trembled. "Don't tell, or summer ends," it said in loopy handwriting. I stared at the words for a long time, not fully understanding, but understanding enough. Not long after I began scratching. It started on my arm, just a little patch near my elbow. Then it spread to my forearm, where my skin turned red and angry. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted something to hurt on the outside. Something I could see, something I could control. Or maybe it was just my body's way of screaming, since my mouth wouldn't. One night, I scratched until I bled. The thin, crimson line along my wrist looked out of place against the pastel sheets. I covered it with the sleeve of my nightgown and went to breakfast like nothing happened. No one noticed. The cicadas kept singing. The world around me was sunny. I was not. The summer of 1962 came with parades and firecrackers and lemonade stands. Girden put up red, white, and blue bunting on every streetlight, and kids ran through sprinklers barefoot, while old men played checkers under the awning outside the hardware store. It was the kind of summer people remember fondly. Except I don't. I was 12, and I had learned how to disappear in plain sight. Grandma still called me Junebug and still fried catfish on Fridays. Raymond still wore that same denim jacket with the candy tucked in the front pocket. And I still got sent down south without question, because as Mama put it, "We've got no other choice, sweetheart." When she said it, her voice sounded like she was apologizing for the weather. That July, I went with Raymond and Grandma to the county fair. It should have been magical cotton candy Ferris wheel, the smell of funnel cakes thick in the humid air. I held a paper ticket in one hand and a cherry snow cone in the other. But everything felt sticky in the wrong way. Not the kind that came from sugar or sweat, but from the quiet weight inside me that wouldn't shake loose. We passed the prize pigs in their pens, and I laughed at the one that grunted like an old man. It was the kind of laugh you make when people are watching. Raymond smiled and tousled my hair. "Still got that big laugh," he said, like it was a compliment. When we got to the rides, Grandma sat on a bench near the carousel with her knitting. "Y'all go have fun," she said, squinting under her straw hat. Raymond walked beside me as we wandered past the booths. I kept a careful distance enough to feel safe, not enough to raise eyebrows. Then, as we passed a row of balloon darts, he accidentally brushed his hand against the small of my back. I jumped. He didn't flinch. "You all right?" he asked casually. I nodded and shoved my hands deep into my pockets. "Yeah, I'm fine." I wasn't. That night, fireworks burst over the fairgrounds. Red and gold and green explosions filled the sky, and people oohed and awed, their faces glowing with each flash. I stood among the crowd and clapped when they clapped. I smiled when they smiled. But inside, everything was still. After the fair, I asked to call home. I used the rotary phone in Grandma's hallway, twisting the long cord around my fingers as it rang. Mama answered on the third ring. "Hello." "Hi, Mama," I said. My voice was small, like it had to squeeze through the wires. "Hey, Junie, how's it going down there?" I paused. "It's okay. But Mama, can I come home early this year? Please." There was a moment of silence. I heard a dish clink in the background, then her sigh. "Oh, honey, we've been over this. Your daddy and I both work doubles all next week. There's no one to watch you." "I could stay with Miss Loretta next door," I offered quickly. "She said I'm always welcome." My mother gave a short laugh. "She's 79 and hard of hearing, baby. That's no place for a growing girl." But my voice cracked. I don't like it here anymore." Her tone changed, gentle but firm. "Don't make trouble, sweetheart. It's just a couple more weeks. Be good for Grandma, all right?" "Okay," I said. After we hung up, I sat on the floor beside the phone, picking at a loose thread on the rug, until it unraveled between my fingers. No one was coming to get me. The next morning, I found another piece of candy on my pillow. Green and white stripe, peppermint. This time no note. But the message was clear. Raymond leaned in the doorway as I got dressed. "You're growing up nice," he said, the way someone might compliment a cake that's just begun to rise. "Don't forget who cares about you." I didn't respond. I didn't look at him. I stared out the window at the swing hanging still in the breeze, and I wondered if maybe I could disappear into the trees behind it and never come back. I didn't know yet that the silence I was living in would last decades. I only knew that no one seemed to notice it now. At 14, I smiled only when people were watching. That summer, I wore jeans even in the heat. Arkansas heat doesn't forgive you for that. It clings to your skin like wet cotton, and the mosquitoes don't much care whether you're modest or miserable. But I didn't care either. I would rather sweat in silence than feel exposed. By then, I'd learned that pretending was easier than explaining, and explaining was impossible. When my parents dropped me off again, Mama kissed my cheek and said, "Try to have some fun this time, Junie." I nodded. Daddy handed me my suitcase and waved from the car. Raymond carried it into the house like he always did, whistling some Elvis tune. Nothing had changed. Not for them. But everything had changed for me. Grandma noticed something, I think. Not enough to ask, but enough to fuss. "Junebug, you haven't touched your peaches," she said one afternoon. "You used to fight me for the syrup off the cobbler pan." "I'm just not hungry," I muttered. She tilted her head and gave me a long look, the kind that landed somewhere between suspicion and sadness. "You ain't the same girl I used to know? What happened to my sweet pie, I offered her a polite shrug, the one I'd practiced in the mirror. Raymond, of course, acted like nothing had ever happened. He joked. He helped Grandma fix the fence. He brought home cold sodas and shared them like some generous big brother. "Still got those serious eyes," he said to me one day, popping the cap off a root beer. "You always did think too hard." I didn't answer. I stared at the condensation sliding down the bottle. At night, the rain came down in sheets. The windows rattled with thunder, and the frogs croaked loud enough to drown out the hum of the fan. I liked the storms. They made the world feel chaotic, which meant no one could expect me to be calm. I kept my bedroom window cracked just enough to feel the air. I imagined what it would be like to run away. Not in a dramatic movie kind of way, but just slip out, walk down the road, until the trees opened up, until the dark swallowed me whole. One night I stood on the windowsill. I had on my sneakers already. I'd stuffed a peanut butter sandwich in my jacket pocket. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I didn't care. Somewhere that didn't have candy on pillows. Somewhere that didn't pretend to love me while pressing my silence like a weight on my chest. But I didn't jump. I looked out into the woods, and all I could think was where. Where would I go? Who would believe me? If no one saw what happened, if no one asked, if no one noticed, then did it even count? I climbed back down and closed the window. The next morning, Grandma made biscuits. She handed me one without asking, but her voice was softer than usual. "You used to hum while you ate. Now you're quieter than a church mouse." I chewed slowly and didn't respond. That evening, Raymond passed me in the hallway and said, "You're looking older these days. Gonna have to beat the boys off you with a stick soon." I stiffened. He laughed and kept walking. I walked to my room, closed the door, and sat on the floor with my back pressed against it. I stared at the cracks in the wallpaper. One of them looked like a lightning bolt. That night, I wrote a sentence in the corner of my notebook, the one where I usually doodled flowers and quotes I saw in magazines. "If no one believes you, does it matter that it's true?" I didn't write anything else for the rest of the summer. When I held my daughter, I felt two hearts, hers and mine, pounding with different truths. Hers was full of beginnings, brand new and clean as untouched snow. Mine was weathered. It beat with old rhythms, fear, resolve, silence. But when her tiny fingers curled around mine in that fluorescent-lit hospital room, I knew one thing with a certainty I hadn't felt since childhood: I would protect her no matter what. It was spring 1979, and the world outside the hospital in Nashville was blooming. The windows showed trees turning green again, dogwoods scattering blossoms across sidewalks. Inside, though, it was all white walls, white gowns, white sheets, and the sharp, ever-present scent of antiseptic. Thomas was beside me, grinning like the world had just tilted right for the first time. "She's beautiful, June," he whispered. "Just like her mama." I smiled, because that's what new mothers do. But inside, something coiled tight. Not fear, something older than fear. Something I'd kept buried under layers of polite smiles and family holidays. Something I thought I'd left behind in a dusty Arkansas chicken coop. "She's so small," I said, running a finger along her cheek. 6 pounds, 9 ounces, the nurse confirmed, writing it down on a clipboard. But I wasn't talking about weight. I was talking about how something so fragile could hold the whole of your heart in one breath. That night, Thomas fell asleep in the recliner beside the bed, snoring softly, arms crossed over his chest. The baby was in the bassinet beside me, wrapped like a burrito in pink and white stripes. I should have rested. I was exhausted. Instead, I listened to the beep of the monitors, to the shuffle of nurses' shoes in the hallway, to the hum of the lights above me. And then somewhere between midnight and dawn, I heard it. A creak. Faint, far away, but unmistakable. It sounded like a rusted hinge. My breath caught. I blinked, sat up, heart pounding. The sound wasn't real. It couldn't be. I was in a hospital. There was no chicken coop here. No swinging door held together by splinters and nails. But my body didn't care. It remembered. The door creaked again in my mind, and I saw the dust, smelled the feathers. I felt again what it was like to be 11, too stunned to move, too confused to speak. I reached into the bassinet and touched my daughter's chest, just to feel it rise and fall. Just to remind myself that this was now. She stirred gently but didn't wake. Later, when a nurse brought her to me for a feeding, I held her close, trying to steady my breath. Her skin was impossibly soft. Her eyes still searching, unfocused. As she latched onto me for the first time, I whispered, barely audible even to myself, "Me sekonje ailam konton thuang." Not ever. My voice cracked. She didn't understand the words, of course. But I did. And saying them felt like a promise written in blood. I watched her suckle with all the instinct of survival, and for a fleeting moment, I felt strong. Like I could rewrite every chapter of my past simply by loving her better than I had been loved. But then the tears came, silent at first, then in waves. They slipped down my cheeks and onto her tiny forehead. I tried to wipe them quickly to keep the salt away from her fresh new skin. But I couldn't stop. Thomas stirred but didn't wake. In that dim room, I held my child and wept, not just from joy, not just from exhaustion, but from an ache I'd carried for 18 years. An ache I thought might finally break open and spill free. I cried because I knew how easily innocence could be stolen. And I cried because no one had ever protected mine. We never talked about pain, but Mabel always knew. Every Sunday afternoon, the women from our church gathered in the community room behind St. Mary's. We brought casseroles, banana pudding, and mismatched stories from the week. There was laughter, teasing, sometimes a hymn sung off-key. But underneath it all, we were women who had seen life, its sweetness, its rot, and everything in between. That Sunday, I brought iced tea in a pitcher with lemon slices floating like little suns. Emily came with me. She liked sitting with the older women, mostly because Mabel let her put as much honey on her cornbread as she pleased. Mabel Turner was 80 and proud of it. She wore cardigans with buttons shaped like birds, and she always smelled like lavender and the faintest trace of Vicks. Her hands were gnarled from arthritis, but her mind was sharp enough to slice butter. "Still no mention of that birthday, huh?" she teased as I poured her a glass of tea. "It's just 74, I smiled, settling beside her. "Not enough to bake a cake over." She gave me a look. "Honey at our age every year deserves icing." Emily giggled from the end of the table, folding a sheet of paper she'd pulled from her backpack. "What you got there, sweetheart?" asked Donna, adjusting her hearing aid. Emily held it up. "It's from our health class. We're learning about family safety." "Family safety?" Ruthie echoed, raising an eyebrow. Emily smoothed the page on the table and began reading aloud, completely unaware of the storm stirring beneath my ribs. "If someone in your home or family ever makes you uncomfortable," she read, "you should tell a trusted adult." I froze. Her voice was so innocent, so steady. My heart, however, started that old, familiar stammer. "Even if they say it's a secret," Emily continued, "you still have the right to speak up." The words landed like pebbles dropped into a still pond. One, then another, then another. Ripples spread inside me. She looked up. Isn't that good advice, ma'am? I opened my mouth. Nothing came. Mabel glanced at me, her eyes soft but focused. You all right, June? She asked quietly. I nodded too quickly. Emily leaned in. Grandma, has anyone ever upset you without you saying anything? My breath caught. The room hadn't gone silent. Someone was still rustling plates. Someone was chuckling at something Ruthie said. But around me, everything else stopped. I stood reaching for the pitcher. Let me top off the tea. The pitcher clinked lightly against the glass rim, and I realized my hand was shaking. Visibly. Like it used to years ago on the edge of a swing seat with rusted chains. Mabel noticed. She always noticed. She placed her hand gently over mine. Not a grip. Not a restraint. Just a warmth that grounded me. You've never talked about your childhood, June, she said. Not accusing, just naming. I suppose there's nothing much to say, I murmured, setting the pitcher down with a soft thunk. Mabel nodded slowly. Sometimes what we don't say is the heaviest load we carry. Emily wandered to the corner with Donna to look at old church photos, and I sank into the seat beside Mabel again. My shoulders were tight. My spine ached. My mouth felt full of cotton. The folded flyer still sat on the table in front of me. You still have the right to speak up? I whispered, reading the line again. Mabel patted my knee. And it's never too late, darling. Never. I didn't respond, but I didn't walk away either. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Emily went to bed. I reread the flyer 4 times. Each word struck something inside me, as though it had been written not for children, but for women like me, women who had learned to smile only when people were watching. Some words are too heavy to say, but not too heavy to write. It was nearly midnight when I tiptoed into my sewing room, the only place in the house that still held pieces of me untouched by time. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old thread. Bolts of fabric lined one shelf, neatly rolled, but untouched for months. The old Singer machine sat quiet. Its needle paused mid-thought, like it was waiting for me to finish something I hadn't yet begun. I turned on the little amber lamp beside the window. It cast a warm pool of light over the desk, making the rest of the room disappear into soft shadow. The rest of the house was asleep. Emily curled in her bed, her fan humming. The television off. Even the street outside silent. I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out the diary. The same green spiral-bound notebook I had tucked away half a century ago. The cover was faded, now curling at the corners. I hesitated, then opened it. My handwriting stared back at me, small, tight, nervous. Some entries were just a few lines. Didn't eat peaches today. Raymond was quiet. I still didn't talk. Scratched too much. Bled through sleeve. One page caught me. I dreamed I could fly. But my legs were tied down. Woke up crying. I ran my fingers over that sentence, remembering how hard it had been to put even that much into words. Tonight, I took a clean sheet of stationery from the drawer. Cream-colored, the kind I usually reserved for birthday notes or thank you letters. I smoothed it flat and picked up my favorite pen. And I began, Dear little June, you did nothing wrong. The words came slowly like molasses at first. Then they began to pour. You were just a child, 11. You didn't invite it. You didn't cause it. You didn't stay silent because you were weak. You stayed silent because you were scared. And that was okay. My hand trembled not from fear this time, but from release. I wiped a tear off the page before it smudged the ink. I remember how you sat on the swing and counted cicadas just to drown out the sound in your head. I remember how you scratched your arms until they bled because that pain made more sense than the one you couldn't name. I paused. My breath caught as a memory surfaced, one I hadn't invited, but one I knew was true. I was sitting on the porch steps, knees drawn to my chest one afternoon long ago. Raymond had just gone inside. I was staring at the swing, not moving, not blinking, and Grandma had come out. She stood for a moment, her hand on the screen door, and just watched me. She didn't say a word. She just looked. And then she turned and went back in. Had she known? Had she suspected? I would never know. But that moment had never left me. Even if they saw I wrote, they didn't know how to hold it. Maybe they didn't want to. But you are not responsible for their silence. I was crying now quietly, like the house would scold me if I were too loud. I forgive you for being quiet. I forgive you for not fighting back. You were never meant to carry that weight. I love you. I believe you. I see you. I stopped. My pen hovered over the paper, and then I signed it, with all the strength I never thought I had. Me. I folded the letter slowly, like it was something sacred. I didn't seal it, just rested it on top of the diary as if one could finally hold the other. That's when I heard the soft shuffle behind me. I turned. Emily stood in the doorway, rubbing one eye, her hair tangled from sleep. "Grandma," she whispered. "What are you doing?" I straightened, instinctively, moved the letter halfway under the diary. "Just writing," I said gently. She padded forward on bare feet and peeked at the paper. Her eyes scanned the first few lines before I could stop her. "Who's little June?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at her, the same wide eyes, the same gentle voice, the same age I had once been. And my hand, it was trembling again, just like it had on that swing so many years ago. Some questions open doors you've nailed shut. The morning sun filtered through the hand-woven curtains I'd made 20 years ago, casting little squares of golden light onto the kitchen table. The scent of toast lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of apple butter. Autumn had arrived crisp and quiet, with a kind of hush that made everything feel closer to truth. Emily sat across from me, spooning applesauce onto her toast like it was jam. She was quiet eyes focused on her plate, but I could tell something was stirring beneath her calm. The letter I had written the night before still sat folded, tucked loosely into a cream envelope. I hadn't hidden it. I'd meant to, but part of me had left it on the table on purpose. Maybe I wanted it to be found. Maybe I wanted to stop hiding. Her eyes flicked toward it, then she looked at me. "Grandma," she said softly, Have you ever been afraid of anyone in your family?" My fork paused midway to my mouth. I set it down gently. "That's a big question, Em," I said, carefully buying time. She didn't blink. "But did you?" I took a slow sip of tea, though it had long gone cold. "When I was young," I said, choosing each word with care, "we didn't talk much about things like that. People just got quiet." Emily nodded. "But silence doesn't mean it didn't happen." That landed hard. I looked at her, really looked, and realized how much she already understood. Maybe not the details, but the weight, the shape of something hidden. I guess I murmured we thought keeping things inside was safer. That if you didn't say it out loud, it couldn't hurt you anymore. "Did it work?" she asked. I smiled, a tired kind of smile. "No, it just grew bigger in the dark." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I think if someone sees something wrong and doesn't do anything, they're still part of the problem." The room held its breath. I hadn't taught her that, not directly, but somehow she knew. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. Not like a shatter, not a loud, painful break, more like a seam that had been stretched too tight for too long, finally letting go. I reached for my napkin, but it was too late. Tears spilled before I could stop them. There were summers I whispered when I wanted to disappear. I used to lie awake at night and wish the trees outside my window would open up and swallow me whole. Emily didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She just reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, steady, small but strong. "Grandma," she said softly, "will you tell me someday?" I nodded, unable to find words. Then slowly, I turned the envelope toward her and slid it across the table. "It's not everything I said, but it's a beginning." She held it carefully, like it might crumble in her hands. Then she looked at me with a softness I hadn't earned, but she gave it anyway. "Whenever you're ready," she whispered. The light through the curtain shifted. The warmth of her hand stayed in mine. For the first time in 63 years, I didn't feel alone with the memory. I told her about the swing. That's where I began. The house was quiet that afternoon, except for the rustle of dry leaves brushing along the porch outside. The kind of quiet that doesn't demand conversation, but holds it gently when it comes. Emily and I sat on the rug in my sewing room. The cedar chest, old, scratched but steady, rested open between us, its brass hinges groaning slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside, memories lay tucked like sleeping creatures, a cracked porcelain doll, a faded photo of Grandma Virginia in her apron, a music box with a missing key. And there, nestled beneath it all, my green velvet pouch and the spiral notebook I had written in as a child. I touched it softly, then handed it to Emily. She held it with both hands, but didn't open it. She waited. So I began. There was a swing behind my grandma's house in Girden, I said. Old wooden seat, rusted chain. It used to creak when the wind blew. I loved that swing. I'd sit on it for hours and pretend I could fly. Emily nodded. One summer when I was 11, my parents sent me there like they always did. It was just me and Grandma and my Uncle Raymond. I paused, tasting the name in my mouth. Emily didn't speak. He was young, 19. Funny. He told stories and made me laugh. Everyone thought he was charming. I thought so too. At first. I reached into the chest again and pulled out a photo. Raymond holding a fishing rod, grinning at the camera. Me beside him, a small dot of a girl with a shy smile and scraped knees. He used to push me on the swing, I said. Until one day, he didn't just push. He asked if I wanted to see a secret, and I followed him. The room stayed still. Even the wind seemed to hush. It was the chicken coop, I said. The door was half off the hinges. There were feathers on the floor, and it smelled like dust and something sour. He shut the door behind us. My hands were trembling now, but I didn't stop. I didn't understand everything. I just knew something was wrong. Deep down, I felt it. But I didn't have words. Not then. Emily leaned forward, eyes wide but soft. She didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. She simply listened, every inch of her attention a shelter. I tried to tell someone once, I said. My mom. I called her from Grandma's house and asked to come home early. She said I was imagining things, that I shouldn't cause trouble. A long silence. I looked down at my lap. There wasn't anyone else to run to, I whispered. So I ran inside myself. Emily reached over and touched the back of my hand. I looked up. It was the swing that broke me, I said, voice cracking. And the silence that kept me broken. We sat like that for a moment. Just the two of us across time. The little girl I once was, the granddaughter now before me, and all the years between. Then Emily spoke. Why now, ma'am? She asked softly. Why tell me? I turned to her, and for the first time the answer came easy. Because someone needs to know, I said. Someone who still has time to use it. I don't want silence to be your inheritance. Emily blinked, her eyes shining. Then she nodded slowly, like she understood more than words could say. The truth didn't ruin me. Hiding it did. It was the first Sunday of December, and the air had that sharp edge of winter that made people walk a little faster and huddle their coats tighter. But inside the back room of St. Mary's Church, it was warm, the heater humming faintly, the scent of cinnamon tea floating from the table, and the familiar rustle of skirts against folding chairs. There were 8 of us that morning. Mabel, as always, wore her red cardigan with the tiny angel pin. Donna brought store-bought cookies and swore no one could taste the difference. Ruthie complained about the draft near the window, and a couple of new women sat near the back, quiet but smiling. I sat near the edge of the circle, hands folded tightly in my lap. The lace tablecloths, the old plastic poinsettias in chipped vases, everything looked exactly as it had for years. But I was not the same. I listened as the women shared news, grandkids' pie recipes, a neighbor who broke her hip. The conversation floated around me like a gentle current, warm and shallow. Then Mabel cleared her throat and asked, like she always did, Anyone want to share something deeper today? Her eyes landed on me. She didn't push, just looked soft and steady. And I don't know why, maybe because of the letter, or the way Emily had held my hand last week, or because the silence inside me was finally louder than the room, but I raised my hand. The circle quieted. Mabel gave a small nod. "Go ahead, June." I stood slowly. My knees ached, but my voice was calm. "I want to share something," I said. "Something I've never spoken aloud in front of more than one person." The room shifted. You could feel the air grow attentive, not tense, just gently holding its breath. "I was 11 when it happened," I began. "I was sent to my grandma's house every summer. It was supposed to be safe. But someone in my family, he hurt me." No one gasped. No one looked away. I didn't tell anyone. Not then. Not for a long time. I thought I'd be blamed. Or worse, disbelieved. So I stayed quiet. And I let that silence grow into something that followed me for decades. The heater clicked. A chair creaked. But still, no one spoke. I became a woman who smiled when people watched. I raised a daughter, buried my mother-knitted sweaters, hosted holiday dinners. But inside, I was still that little girl on the swing, wondering what I'd done to deserve it. I swallowed hard. But recently, my granddaughter, she asked me something I couldn't ignore. She asked if anyone had ever made me uncomfortable. And for the first time, I couldn't lie. A tear slipped down my cheek. I let it. I used to think the truth was ugly, that it would ruin everything. But the truth didn't ruin me. Hiding it did. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then Mabel stood, walked across the room, and wrapped her arms around me. "Now you're not alone," she whispered. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of her words settle over years of silence. When I opened them, another voice spoke. It was Esther, the quiet woman who always sat near the window, never saying much. Her voice was shaky but clear. "You're not the only one," she said. Then another voice, this time, "Ruthie's me neither." And then silence again, but not the old kind. Not the heavy, shameful kind. This was something else. This was space being made. This was healing taking shape in the room. For the first time in my life, I realized my story didn't make me broken. It made me brave. When I saw Emily sketching the old swing, I knew the story was no longer just mine. The kitchen was wrapped in that soft kind of silence that only comes in winter. The hush after cocoa has been poured, the hum of the heater in the vent, the distant sound of wind brushing against the windows. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her head bent over a piece of paper. Her pencil moved slowly, carefully. She was focused in that way she always was, when drawing, tongue tucked into the corner of her mouth, eyes narrowed just a bit. I watched her from the doorway, hands wrapped around my warm mug. The scent of cinnamon drifted up from her cup. "What you drawing?" I asked. She looked up, smiling. "Almost done. Don't peek." So I waited, sipping quietly, letting the moment stretch. When she finally turned the paper around, I felt something shift inside me. It was the swing. Our swing. The one behind Grandma Virginia's house. Wooden, slightly crooked, hung with uneven chains. But in the drawing, the seat was empty and still peaceful even. The background was soft and golden, like a memory with the sharp edges worn away. Across the top, in neat handwriting, she'd written, "Grandma's swing, you were brave before I knew what brave meant." I didn't speak, couldn't. I just reached for her hand, squeezed it gently. Something that had lived in my chest for 63 years loosened. For the first time, I could think of the swing without feeling my breath catch. I could remember the chicken coop and not recoil. I could see the past, not just as what had broken me, but as what had shaped the strength in both of us now. Emily took a sip of her cocoa and looked thoughtful. "You know," she said after a moment, "there's a girl in my class. She told me last week that someone in her family was hurting her." My chest tightened. She didn't want to tell a teacher, Emily went on. So I helped her write it in a note. We gave it to our counselor. My heart swelled. With pride, with sorrow, with awe. "She's safe now," Emily added quietly. "She's staying with her aunt, and she's going to therapy." I nodded, tears burning the edges of my eyes. "That's a brave thing you did," I said. Emily shrugged. "You showed me how." I looked again at the drawing at the swing that had once held all my silence and now held something else entirely. A story, a beginning, a reason. I traced the edge of the paper with one finger. You know, I said slowly, I used to think telling my story was just about survival, about making peace with the past. Emily watched me carefully. But now, I think it might be about more than that. Maybe it's about passing something forward, about making sure no one else feels alone the way I did. She smiled, and there was something wise in it, something older than her 13 years. I think you should come speak to our school, she said. If you're ready? I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window where bare branches scratched softly at the glass. I thought about the porch swing, the chest of memories, the women at church, my own trembling hand on the page. Then I looked back at Emily, and I nodded. Maybe I said, maybe I am. It tried to take my innocence, but it didn't take my voice forever. The classroom was bright and warm sunlight streaming through tall windows and dancing across posters about friendship, kindness, and consent. Rows of desks lined the room, most filled with 7th and 8th graders, wearing hoodies and sneakers, chewing gum, and whispering behind folders. I stood near the whiteboard palms, damp heart beating slow but heavy. Emily sat in the front row, her hair braided neatly down one side, a nervous smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. She gave me a little thumbs up. I gave her a breathless smile back. The teacher, a young woman in a cardigan covered with tiny pencils, tapped a bell. All right, class, she said gently. Today we have a special visitor. Some of you already know her. Emily stood up, holding the microphone with both hands. This is my grandma, she said proudly. She's not just my family, she's someone really brave, and she's going to talk about something hard, but important. Then she sat down again, her eyes locked on mine. I took the mic. Hi, I began, my voice soft. My name is June. I'm 74 years old, and I'm here to tell you a little story. There were a few giggles. Some students looked unsure, but most were listening. I was your age once, I said, and back then, I thought the worst thing in the world was being alone with a secret. I didn't go into detail. I didn't need to. The place where it happened to me was an old chicken coop, I continued. It was dusty and quiet, and when I left it, I didn't tell anyone. Not for years. Because I thought no one would believe me. Because I thought I'd done something wrong. I looked at them 12, 13, maybe 14 years old, and I thought how young I had been. How small. But the truth is, I said, voice steady now, I did nothing wrong. And neither would you. If anyone ever makes you uncomfortable, if something feels wrong in your body, your gut, your heart, you have the right to speak. You have the right to be heard. The room was still. You don't have to be afraid to tell the truth, I said. The silence doesn't protect you. It only protects the person who hurt you. One girl in the third row wiped her eye. And most of all, I finished, you are never, ever alone. When I stepped back, the room stayed quiet. Then a ripple of claps began, soft at first, then stronger. Afterwards, as the bell rang and backpacks were slung over shoulders, a girl with freckles and glasses came up to me, not saying a word. She hugged me tight, her small arms barely reaching around my back. I held her gently. No words were needed. As Emily and I walked out into the winter sun, she looked up at me with wide eyes. That was amazing, she said. I just smiled. For the first time in 63 years, I felt like I could breathe. The sunlight hit my face warm despite the cold, and something lifted in my chest. It was like stepping out from under a shadow I'd carried so long, I'd forgotten what life without it felt like. Emily skipped a step ahead, then turned around to face me. Grandma, she asked, do you think you're ready to tell your story? To more people? Like, maybe a podcast or YouTube? I paused, one hand on my scarf. I thought of the swing, of the chicken coop, of the church women, of Mabel, of the little girl in class who said nothing but hugged tight. Then I nodded. Maybe it's time, I said. Maybe the story's finally ready to live outside of me. I never meant to tell the world. I only meant to tell one girl. But maybe that's how healing begins. The little room where we set up our studio wasn't much, just a spare corner by the window, a soft lamp, a USB microphone, and a crocheted coaster for my teacup. The desk creaked if I leaned too hard on it. The curtains fluttered every time the heater kicked on. But somehow it felt just right. The sunlight streamed in through the window that morning, casting long beams across the floor and warming my fingers as I sorted through the worn pages of my old diary. Emily sat on the floor beside me, cross-legged, her laptop open, audio software blinking. She'd set everything up, adjusted. The mic showed me where to look, how to breathe between sentences. She'd even made me a cup of chamomile tea, just the way I liked it, with a little honey and a slice of lemon. "Are you ready?" she asked. I nodded slowly, hands resting on the leather-bound journal. Its cover was frayed, the corners bent, but the words inside still whispered like they had waited patiently all these years. I took a deep breath, then leaned toward the mic. "My name is June Elliott," I began, voice low, steady. "I'm 75 years old, and I still remember the swing behind my grandmother's house in Arkansas." I paused. Emily smiled quietly behind the screen, watching the audio wave move. I continued, letting the story flow, not rushed, not rehearsed. I told it the way I would to a friend over pie and coffee. I told about the summers, about the silence, about the chicken coop, about the letter I never sent, about the girl in the front row who said nothing but hugged everything out of me. There were moments I had to stop, take a sip of tea, close my eyes, gather myself. Once I reached into my cardigan pocket and found a small cloth Emily had slipped in that morning. It was a handkerchief embroidered in soft blue thread. "Bravery is choosing to speak." I held it in my hand as I read the next section. "I thought silence was safety," I said into the mic. But silence was just another room with no door. I didn't read the whole diary. Some parts I still held for myself. But I read enough to crack something open, to let something through. When I reached the last page, I felt my voice tremble, but I didn't stop. "And I'm still here," I read, "for every girl who needs to know she's not alone." I sat back in my chair. The mic light turned red. Recording ended. Outside, a cardinal chirped on the branch just outside the window. Emily reached over and touched my arm. "You did it, Grandma." I smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile you offer for politeness. It was deep, earned. The kind that comes when your breath finally matches your heart. She clicked to upload the file title, "The Swing and the Silence, Part 1. We chose not to use background music, just my voice and the truth. I watched the progress bar crawl slowly across the screen. When it finished, the page refreshed. A quiet moment passed. Then the notification popped up. "One new comment." Emily clicked. We both read the words together. This saved my life. I didn't cry. Not this time. I just breathed in the light, the sound of my own heartbeat, the warmth of my granddaughter beside me. The story was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone who ever needed to know they were never, ever alone.